Hello, my name is Barbara Field. Welcome to my channel, The Journey of Grief, Becoming Us Without Them. I started this channel just so that people who have experienced grief or work with people who are experiencing grief would have a place to just share. So we're not going after the big time brain science here or giving you tons of advice. It's just a place for people to share their experience and try to offer resources to one another. So today I've invited my friend Tzeli to talk to us about grief, because I think if you were to think of the kinds of grief, Tzeli's probably experienced them all. So Tzeli, how about if you introduce yourself and tell us what you want us to know about grief?
In one sentence. So my name is Tzeli Triantafillou. I'm a holistic wellness coach and the founder of Myndzen, helping individuals reconnect their mind, body, emotions, and spirits to solve seemingly unsolvable problems, predominantly focusing on stress, burnout prevention and recovery, and chronic pain. And interestingly, my entire life and my business and how I live my life today is really centered around overcoming grief of various different levels, just like Barbara, you've pointed out. I think it's important for your audience to know that when I was 9 years old, I told my parents that I know why I'm here, all excited. I'm here to find the cure for human suffering and rights and, help others alleviate theirs. And they just laughed at me and said, are you out of your mind? If you want to find a cure for anything, you need to become a scientist. So I'm not supporting you to become a writer. That's a hobby. So there you go. There is your exit from this silly dream that you have. And there's your entrance into academia and science and all that stuff. So I guess suffice to say, 45 years later, I can tell you that that was my first relationship with grief, because at that moment I was told that who I am in my essence and what I'm about, what I think my purpose is, what my dream is not acceptable. I need to mold myself and become a scientist, not a writer, to fit in and to belong. So I guess we can start from that. I was born into the experience of grief.
Yeah, our families do kind of hand us our scripts sometimes, don't they?
They do. And I guess, in those moments when we're children, we have no idea that in that moment, a tremendous, humongous, long period of grief begins. That, basically, if I was to summarize the way I'm now seeing this disconnection from myself, it's basically our mind, body, emotions, and spirit are just scattered, trying to meet expectations and fit into others' shoulds, and what we should be and what we should look like. And, so that's kind of how it all started.
I can remember an experience just like that when I was a girl. So I'm 73. I'm much older than you. But they came out with this very cool thing. You could buy a switchboard, an actual little switchboard with the cables and everything, and you could hook it up to the phone and it actually worked. Or they had your own little kid payphone, right? And I asked for the switchboard, and my dad told me that's too expensive. You're only good enough for the phone. And then another time I asked for Christmas, I would like an erector set because I want to be an architect and build bridges. And my dad said, you're a woman, you're going to go to college and be a dietitian so you can work in a hospital and marry a doctor. So play with your dolls and forget about the erector set.
I can totally relate. And especially like the role we're supposed to play like women, And knowing you, Barbara, really helps, because I don't know if I can say you're such a badass, but it's taken a lot for us to unearth who we are as women, because I was also told, I played water polo. Yeah, I was in competitive sports, and I was told, "Oh, gosh, like she's too much like a guy, like nobody's gonna want her. So we should put her in ballet to make her more feminine, So those silent losses of who we truly are, they usually lie dormant, and yeah, it's interesting. We don't even realize it, but it's interesting because you have such a beautiful channel about grief, and usually people will tune into your channel, when they lost somebody they love, they lost maybe their career, athletes. I see you have a lot of interesting topics, yet not very often do we realize this silent grief that we feel from being disconnected from ourselves when we're checking the boxes, we have successful careers, we got the education, we have the nice house, the nice car, and yet something isn't quite right. Right? We're feeling low, we're feeling depressed, and we're like, what's wrong with me? Like, oh my gosh, like other people have it a lot worse, Yeah. So it's interesting because all these other more traditional losses, like I lost my mother 2.5 years ago. I've lost my favorite grandpa when I was 13 years old. I mean, I could literally write a book, just like you mentioned, about the incredible range of grief I have experienced, losing like really significant people, first and foremost, but also losing my family of origin, losing my country, because being told I couldn't be who I was, that kind of pushed me to get a scholarship and move away. I moved from Greece. I was born in Greece. At 17, I applied to go to university in England because it was the only country that had toxicology, which this is what I wanted to study, right? So suddenly I also lost my Greek identity, my family of origin. And here I am, 17, a complete kid, in a foreign country. And so having lost so many people, my culture, if you will, my family, everything, we always think that we just have to get through all that. I'll get through it, and someday I will get on the other side where I can finally relax and enjoy my life. That's like part of life, is like getting through things. And it took me almost half a century to actually realize the most unorthodox gift of grief, even really unbearable grief, like, you losing your husband, me losing my mom. I've lost a handful of very, very important people in my life. And it took me half a century to realize that that grief in and of itself is the most incredible portal to come back to our true self.
That's true. Because like, for example, in being married, we started dating when we were 17 years old. So I was someone's child, someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's wife, someone's mother. And it was not until, some of those roles got stripped away. So as the children left and we're down to someone's wife, I went back to school. I did all kinds of cool stuff, but we progressively learned how to actually attach to one another and have a good relationship with no small amount of therapy. And so when he died, it really was the first time I was just someone. And that was why I named the page that becoming us without them. Like, who am I? Who am I without them? What's my new title? What's my new thing that defines me? And figuring out it's me, I define me. And people right away would say, well, are you going to date again? Are you going to get married again? And I would say, are you kidding? I spent 64 years being someone's something. And now I have a chance to be me. Why would I want to go backwards?
Yeah. Yeah, you're making such a good point too, because, okay, there's losses and losses as well. And they have varying degrees. I cannot even imagine, losing my life partner, my husband, of 64 years. Like, sincerely, I remember when it happened as well, I would not even know where to begin. How do you get through that? Because you will never get over, your beloved, never. But
You
how
just
do you get through
incorporate
it? Like, what do you do in that moment, to identify a new, you know, identity for yourself and also a new life? Like, what does a life look like without that person?
Yeah, I think the most important thing I would want people to know is don't try to hurry, because we do
Mm.
spend a life like, I'll be happy when I'm an adult. I'll be happy when I finish college. I'll be happy when I'm married. I'll be happy when my children grow up. I'll be happy, I'll be happy, I'll be happy, losing a lot of what could have made us happy in the moment. And so when your partner dies, a lot of people right away go look for something to make them happy, partly
Mm,
because they don't realize, like you said, the grief is the beginning of a new journey that nobody wants to go on.
mm-hmm,
But it's going to take time and you can't hurry it. I counsel women who rush off and get married again, or some men too. And then when they finally start doing their grief work, they realize this partner that they've chosen was a band-aid and they don't really have anything in common, and they might be
mm-hmm.
lovely people, but they don't want to be there. And that's really a tragedy when you've kind of both sold your houses and mixed your money and your families, and you wake up thinking, what have I done? So I encourage
Yeah.
people to just trust the horrible process, that there is a thing
Mm-hmm.
happening, that there is a process occurring, and that as you incorporate the grief into a space where there's room for other stuff, then it's time to figure out the other stuff. But if you use the other stuff to medicate the grief, you might never find the cool stuff.
You're actually making such a critical and important point here because, of course, you asked me, what do you want to tell us about grief? And I tell you what I realized half a century later after grieving like my own identity. And you're making such a critical point because somebody who has just lost either their significant other, their child. I've lost my son at 22 and a half weeks of gestation. It is by far the most unfathomable loss I've ever experienced, right? So when somebody's there and they hear you and I having this little conversation, and I'm saying, actually, grief is the most incredible portal back to our true selves. They may be like, has this woman been drinking the Kool-Aid? So I love that you're bringing this really important point because the way we've been conditioned to deal with the excruciating pain of losing a loved one, even losing our job, okay? Because that's also like, that's our livelihood, right? Losing a child, losing a very important relationship. The way we've been conditioned is like, how can I numb it? I hate this feeling, take it away. Either give me a shot of tequila or let me go on, I don't know, mat or whatever. Find somebody quickly because I can't bear it. Like I feel like I'm gonna die. I cannot stand it. And although that's very human to do, and I'm not necessarily frowning upon, and I've done all of those things, by the way, well, not going on dating sites when I divorced my ex-husband, but certainly, trying to numb it, stress eating, drinking wine, doing whatever to numb it. That's a common human tendency. And at the same time, when we're in it, I love the advice you just shared because the most critical part of the process is just being with it. Just do the best that you can. That's what I've learned. To just, like John Kabat-Zinn very wisely says, put the welcome mat out for pain.
Oh,
I love the saying every time I'm going through a difficult experience, recently my daughter joined the US Marines. She's in week 3 of boot camp. So I have no contact with my daughter for, let me tell you, I have a countdown widget for 62 days, 18 hours, and 39 minutes. I have a little countdown. Where is it? Countdown widget that
there
tells
you
me,
go.
right? And so that's painful, considering the time she was in my belly. and she's about to turn 19. So for the last 20 years, I've had daily contact with my daughter, and suddenly it's been excruciating to not have it, right? Different from losing your spouse. However, it is so important what you're saying, not to rush it. No, do your best to just be without pain, because that pain has a very important message. And if I start eating, binge watching TV, drinking, doing whatever to avoid it, then just like they say, whatever you resist persists. And so,
Sure.
yeah, that's super important. That's a great wisdom, I should say, when you're in it, just know everything is impermanent. It's not always going to be this way, and we do have to get through it. We can't just ignore it. Denial is a great coping strategy for, and I understand it's like one of the natural steps of grief. However, when we stay too long in it, then we can just prolong the pain, and it's just gonna keep getting louder and louder, knocking louder and louder. Hello, are you gonna pay attention to me? I'm right here. So yeah, that's a really important point.
Yeah, I remember this movie called The Neverending Story, and they came because they needed a hero to save them from the nothing. And this beautiful world full of magnificent, magical things was being slowly eaten alive by the nothing. And the nothing was just the loss of joy and hope of the children in the world. And that's grief is like that. Grief is happy to eat more and more of your life and consume more and more of what could be pleasant experiences because it seems so hopeless to get over it.
Yeah.
And the end of that movie is, him flying along in the air with a magical creature at the end. And there is a sense of that. Gradually, you start to experience joy again and start to find amazing things and do amazing things. Every time I do something that I would have happily relegated, you're mechanical, you do that. So every time I watch a YouTube video and figure out how to get my refrigerator to work properly, or when I figure out how to install a drip system in my backyard, all those things make me so proud of myself, because before I would have said, too hard, you do that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it takes sometimes to see that. I guess the one thing that maybe is easier to access, because I agree with you 100%. I was the same with my mom. I had a very complicated, beautiful, and tumultuous, relationship with my mom. And she was a very dominant, presence, even over my dad. And I was just like that, just like you said, like once I found myself, I detached myself from her presence and I moved to a different country. I was so proud of myself for like realizing that, oh my gosh, I can do this, and actually I maybe I've done it even better than what my mom would have instructed me to do. And at the same time there is a long way to get to that point. You know how they say there's a silver lining to what you're going through right now, and when we're just in the thick of it, it's like la 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 la. I'm not there yet. Don't tell me that there is a reason, why my son died or, your husband died. I don't want to hear that. I'm not in that stage yet. The only one thing I can say for me was effective in that stage, like when my mom passed away 2.5 years ago, was to keep reminding myself that as I'm going through this, my mind has so much capacity. It can only hold so much at one time. So, yes, there's an inevitable pain. My mom very unexpectedly passed away. I will never be able to hear her voice. I can't hold her in my arms. I can't call her and complain about something, and to hear her little silly things she would say, her little motivational speeches she used to give me. That is true. And what is also true is that right now I can feel that pain. I can notice where is it in my body, what color it is it vibrating? I can do this sort of thing and just stay with it without denying it. And at the same time, I can notice, practical mindfulness, I guess. I can notice all the stories that are coming up in my mind, stories along the lines. I think when we've lost, especially a person, it's very easy to say, oh, I wish I could have done this. I wish I could have said that. If I had done this, like in my case, I was going to go to Greece to be with my mom after the holidays, and she passed away on December 30th. So, oh, I wish I could have gone, did I miss something in between the lines? Did she know? Was she trying? All those stories is what I'm trying to say, is that they can create second darts of pain that are completely unnecessary. So it may take us a while to realize that we can experience joy after the loss of a significant relationship in our life. That's going to take some time. But for now, be mindful to not add second darts as much as possible, and they'll come up. Guilt is going to come up. I don't think there is a person I've ever met amongst hundreds of clients that I've had, friends, family members, and myself, that we don't notice those guilt trips popping up in our mind. And it's not a matter of like shoving them and pretending they're not there, like saying, okay, I see you, guilt. Hey, how are you doing? I hear you, and kind of like reel the mind back to come to the present moment. Because I think sometimes those inevitable thoughts can really make grief feel like, you're swallowing a whole fish with all the bones going down your throat. It's one way I can like describe it, so I think it's important to be mindful of the stories.
Yeah, the research now kind of talks about how we attach to people at three levels: our calendar, sort of, our map, and our heart. So they're saying it's really good for us to just sit like 5 minutes a day and remember the fond things and remember what we loved about them, because you can actually get oxytocin, the bonding hormone, from just remembering lovely times. And that actually soothes the stress hormones that are causing that. And then as our brain gradually remaps that, no, the garage is not going to open at 6 o'clock. No, I'm not going to wake up on Christmas morning and find them there. So as I get my calendar, as I gradually get them out of my calendar, and my brain stops trying to get the things to happen when they're supposed to happen, and the part of my brain that expects them to be in the bed when I wake up in the morning, or expects them to be in that chair right there, or so as I get my map to stop expecting them to be in the places, and my calendar to stop expecting them to be there in the times, what I can be left with is a really rich experience of them. And so turns out oxytocin actually medicates. It's helpful in trauma processing. It's helpful in stress reduction. Well, we can actually induce our own oxytocin, but it also explains why it is so critical that we include people in our grief process, because those oxytocin interactions with them enable us to process some of that pain and get some of those stress hormones out of our body. And it also puts lovely memories into our calendar for now.
Yeah.
Lovely memories into our places for now. So I'm like, this is like me saying we should go and hang out with people, which is definitely not one of my superpowers. So I've had to force myself to go do relational things. Always stunned and amazed how much better I feel after, but definitely not inclined. So when you tell people newly in grief, I know this feels terrible. You don't even want to breathe or swallow. And I'm saying just go hang out with people, but you don't have to entertain them. Just sit in the room with them. Just sit there and let them love on you. That's plenty. But I have to be entertaining, right? So it's really tricky to fix that relational part. And all those should have, could have, would have thoughts, that's no, he's not really dead. He's not really gone. He's not really missing. And every time we do that, our calendar resets with them in it. If I just did this, he'd still be standing here. If I just did this, the garage door will open at 6 o'clock. So we are encouraged now to really know those are terrible for our nervous system, and quickly try to switch over to what is true and what was true and what can be true.
Yeah. And, the nervous system is so wild, as you and I both know and are very intimately aware. And what we don't realize often is that if we don't intervene, we know, I think most of the people know by now that the mind drives what the brain and the nervous system do. So when, to your point, we're just keep resetting that calendar, and bringing up, oh my gosh, this isn't going to happen. The garage door is not going to happen at 6. The part that we don't realize is that the brain relies on the mind to determine what it's going to do. So every thought, like the door is not going to open, if we dwell on it, because it's normal to have that thought, first and foremost, right? But how do we relate to that thought will determine if the brain is going to ring the fear alarm or not. And the part that most of us, at least I did not realize, despite my 10 years of scientific education, what we don't realize is that when the brain feels threatened by what the mind fixates on over and over, having the same thought over and over again, is actually what's misfiring danger signals. So we will experience chronic pain. We'll get lots of colds. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that. When we're going through grief, we get sick more often. We're not sleeping very well. We may get a cold sore out of the blue. Lots of inexplicable things, and we don't realize, or our whole body hurts. And we already know that physical pain and emotional pain activate the same region, the brain, the anterior insulate, I believe. So the part that we don't realize is that if we're not a tad kinder, I'm just gonna say just kinder with those thoughts, meet them with love and compassion. I hear you, Barbara. The door is not gonna open at 6. It makes sense that you're having this thought right now, Now, how about something genuine, not pep talks? I'm not about, oh, your husband passed away. I'm so sorry, Barbara, but you're alive. You're still walking. Like, this stuff is not going to work. But I think there's a lot out there, in social media about rewiring your brain and, changing your mind, for happiness and all that stuff. And to me, that all comes down to that moment. It's like I'm recognizing that there's a thought that is now aggravating my brain, and my brain is ringing the fear alarm, and I'm feeling anxious. How am I going to live without the garage door opening at 6? And that can keep us in a state of fight or flight, freeze or fawn, like the stress response that can have really significant impact, not just in our mental and emotional well-being as we're going through grief, but obviously our physical health as well. So I
That's such
think
a
that,
great example, Tzeli. So when 6 o'clock comes and my body starts saying the door's not going to open, it's not going to open, if instead I can throw some oxytocin in there, well, of course, it's hard for you that that door is not going to open. It's so sad. This is so sad. And if I can let myself feel what I'm actually feeling instead of trying to escape into fixation on the garage door, then it processes and clears.
yeah, I see that a lot in my working with chronic pain patients. I'm seeing that to be such a huge factor. I'm working with some people that have lived with chronic pain for like 30 years, and they're like, yeah, I just came to you because, my doctor recommended, but I don't believe this is gonna work, and essentially, pain reprocessing therapy is exactly calming down a threatened brain. Chronic pain, I mean, we're healing machines. We can have structural issues. I happen to have 5 of those, by the way. I've experienced that loss as well, my physical health. That's a whole different story. But, my point is that we don't realize, we think that we feel pain because there's something wrong with me. And chronic pain specifically is a direct output of the brain being such a powerful predictive machine and working in cahoots with the mind, to fire danger signals to make sure we will never get hurt again. And I think a lot more emphasis needs to be placed on what it is that we should be doing with those disempowering thoughts. And I love the way you kind of like brought it home very beautifully, when you said like you approach it with compassion, and people say, well, when I go into those negative thought spirals, I want to beat myself up. I don't want to approach me with compassion. And that's the exact opposite of what an anxious brain needs. And yeah, validating, of course, every time I think about the garage door, I'm gonna feel sad. And that's our invitation to come and put our arms around ourselves. I'm a big fan of Dr. Christine F's work, and she has beautiful resources on her website, little self-compassionate break with different circumstances. So I've taught myself, I've trained myself when I'm catching myself having those thoughts, just kind of like putting my hand in my heart and closing my eyes and pretending, somebody I love very much, like my daughter when she was young, is in front of me. And I talk out loud as if I'm talking to that person, oh, of course the garage door breaks your heart, my love. I understand it. What do you need right now? Do you need to call Barbara and have a conversation? Do you need to take a walk? Do you want to listen to your favorite song? Because yeah, that's gonna hurt. The garage door idea is gonna hurt. And I don't know why, out of all the things we're taught so little about self-compassion, you know, because it's such an important part as well. Just like, starting from the beginning, you said it. Yes, my love, you're right. Secondly, like bringing lots of self-compassion. It really is the antidote to falling right into the trap of that highly anxious state. How am I going to live without this person? How am I going to live without the garage door opening? You're right. So let me create a little safe cradle for you. Take a few deep breaths. It's super hard. So, how can I
Well,
support
let's
myself?
talk a little bit more. Like you mentioned, we both we both have families that did not exactly teach us self-compassion and deep, intimate attachments to safe human beings. So let's talk a little bit more about how that initial programming in our nervous system of just suck it up and move on affects our ability to tolerate, process, and rebound from grief, and even our idea that somehow we should be able to make this pain go away instead of get used to this, it's going to be your new best friend.
Yeah, it's, you especially know how complex that whole process is. But, one of the things that I'm finding is super valuable when we're trying to understand all the intricate parts of, how do people like you and I, based on how we were raised, being told we need to staff it, be more feminine, do this, do that, do the other. Like, how do we get to the uh, phase of like, okay, this is a project. I have to be tough. I can't show that I'm weak. I can't do, there's so many layers, that come to that. But I guess the easiest way to understanding in a practical sense for me has been to accept that I was literally told I need to be a different person.
Mm.
Okay, I need to be a person who's more feminine. I need to be a person who doesn't whine, doesn't complain, says thank you, because it's like they were giving me this very rich food that was hurting my stomach. And of course, I was a very anxious child. So I had a lot of stomach aches, and I would say, I can't eat this. This is like too, lamb with all this fat, like it makes my stomach hurt, And it's like, then go to your room, no dinner for you tonight. And I'd start crying, and I had really wonderful, one of them is still alive, wonderful parents, they weren't, beaters or abusive or anything, yet just that little process right there of being told, what, you're not appreciative, go to your room. And then I'd start crying because I was hungry. I'm like, but I'm hungry. It's like, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. Go to your room and don't come back until you're behaving like a good girl again. So when you think about it from that perspective, even in people that have not experienced big T traumas, and I make the distinction, because not to go too far of a tangent, but all my life I used to think I have nothing to complain about. I had a perfect childhood. I had a summer house and a winter house, and we traveled with my parents, and everything was hunky-dory. But it's very traumatic for a child. It shapes the child's nervous system when they're deprived of the irreducible needs of a child to rest, to get love without having to work for it, without having to like mold themselves, right? So to answer your question, I'm hoping I'm slowly untangling some of the complicated web of what happens to a child when, they're not safely, securely attuned, to their parents. It's like the nervous system begins to build in a way where a new person is formed. A person that doesn't whine, a person that doesn't complain, a person that pulls up their sleeves, figures it out, and then comes back to share with you the hero's journey, a person that never says no, a person who's always mindful of taking care of everybody else's needs. So these are just some examples from my personal life. I'm sure your audience can pull out things that we do, and we know these are deeply ingrained coping strategies, survival strategies, if you will, of the strategic self. We know because those things usually are accompanied with a should. I should do what Barbara needs right now, regardless of whether I can accommodate what it is that Barbara. So we can kind of tell from that. Secondly, I'm a very big, as a holistic wellness practitioner, we can tell when our subconscious is driving, is in the driver's seat, also because we can feel it. We may feel tightness in our chest, a pit in our stomach, right? But for the most part, we just think, to your point, this is just what I should do. I should tough it up, go through with it, and don't I dare pick up the phone and ask for help when I'm struggling, because that's not what good girls do.
Right. We
I
don't
should,
bother people. Don't bother people.
right, I should figure it out, and then come back and help others, as well.
Well, and in my family, like with my mom, it didn't take you very long to figure out she was wound so tight that if you showed up with any needs, that just made it worse instead of better. So it was like putting your hand in a fan blade trying to get anything helpful out of my mother. And then my dad, anytime you asked him something that he was uncomfortable with, he would either make up a stupid answer or he would say, go talk to your mother. Like when I was, so I was born in 1952, right in the Korean thing.
Yeah.
And we have these Asian eyes from our little 4% Asian blood. And so I came home to my dad saying, people are calling me China eyes. And I was like maybe 6-ish, right? And he said, you tell them you are not Chinese, you are Korean. So I marched back to school thinking that's going to make it better. And that makes it worse because this was not a time period when you wanted to proudly claim that you were Korean.
Yeah.
And another time I came home and all the kids were bragging about how much their bikes cost, right? And I said, all the kids are saying their bikes are better than mine. How much did my bike cost? And he said, you tell those kids your bike costs $17. And so I go back thinking, now I'm going to be important. Now I'm going to be equal. And all they did was make fun of me because I thought 17 was a number. So he would give you these answers that made it worse instead of better. So I learned, don't go to any, grown-ups are not helpful. They make it worse instead of better. Don't trust anybody. So now I show up in grief, and I've already done a lot of trauma therapy, but still my entire nervous system is like, don't ask people for help. They'll just tell you that you're yucky. Don't expect anything from anyone. Anything that you try to do to get help will make it worse instead of better. So it was this huge 3 steps forward, 2 steps back for me to go get help, hide in shame, go get help, hide in shame. And I remember my clinical supervisor, I said to her, I just shouldn't feel this sadness for so long. She's like, remind me again how long it's been? Almost 2 years. Seriously, you're thinking this sadness will be over in 2 years. Well, yeah.
Yeah. Like, what's wrong with me? Why is it still here?
Yeah. I can't even grieve properly.
Exactly, right? It goes back to that original wound. Oh, wait, I said, this is who I am, and I'm told that that's wrong. I need to be somebody else, you know? So it all kind of ties in, you know? And I guess it's like different types of wounds too. There's the wound that, you know, I'm pretty sure you and I share, you know, the wound of I'm not good enough, so I better do enough things to be good enough. And then there's the defectiveness wound that says no matter what you do, it will never be good enough, right? So either way, it's interesting how our nervous system, it's like it's this whole universe, like in and of itself, you know. And sadly, here's another layer that is super important. Being with the nervous system, you know, Gabor Mate has said something really beautiful, you know, trauma is not what happened to you, but it's what happened inside of you as a result of what happened to you. And I really, really love that because we don't often realize that all these little changes that happen in our nervous system that are translated in a practical sense by, oh, I'm hurting, I need to snap out of it. 2 years, I should be on the road, like pull my pants up. You know, I can't be still feeling sad. You know, like all this, I shouldn't be needing help. I'm a behavioral health professional for crying out loud. Like, how dare I? It's so embarrassing. Like, I should know how to do this. Like, all this. What I found, which is like an epiphany that's like fresh for me, like in the last 5 years, like since my mother passed away, is that they create an extra layer of grief and suffering that's completely unnecessary. And that is right in this moment, I promise you, there's tons of people that love, cherish, and value us. But because of the way our nervous system has been shaped and how anxious it gets just at the thought of reaching out for help, you know, often I forget who said it, like it's like hugging a porcupine, like we want to connect, but then we push people away at the same time. So it's kind of like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, you know, and it only has to do with the way our nervous system is shaped. And it can be super inflamed when we're going through grief because we can find ourselves all alone thinking, oh, now my mom is gone, my son is gone, your husband is gone, we're all alone in this universe. We don't know who we are anymore, you know, but we don't realize that the way our nervous system is shaped is actually pushing people away. And oftentimes people may want to come and connect and put their arms around us, you know, but they ask us, you know, how are you doing? I'm like, I'm fine, right? So sometimes it may take like a sweet therapist to say something and then, you know, the tears come out. You know, I remember when I lost my son, it was such a traumatic experience. It was very unexpected. And I remember talking to people and having no tears. You know, I had to completely disconnect from my feelings because they were, you know, I didn't think I was going to survive that. And I had a 2-year-old looking at me, mama, mama, completely unaware of what I had just gone through, you know, having to have labor induced and, you know, hold my deceased baby, you know, in my arms, you know, and it was just so absolutely unsettling that I was inadvertently not able to express it to anybody. I just shut down. You know, I didn't want to talk to anybody for many, many days. People would come, bring in food and stuff, you know, and I just told them I don't want to talk to anybody, you know. But even when I started talking, after several weeks, I was like shut down. And I think that's really important to also bring to the surface because sometimes those pre-installed, you know, subconscious pre-installed coping mechanisms are the very thing that can deprive us of the analgesic, you know, the pain killer that we need when we're sitting with pain, drinking tea, hopefully, not wine, and it gets super, super strong. You know, just like you were saying earlier, connection is really soothing. So,
Yeah, and it's so true. We put ourselves out there. We don't mean to. We don't realize we're doing it, but we put ourselves out there as so self-sufficient that when people do stuff and we say, "Well, I would have wanted to do that. Why didn't you invite me?" They're like, "Well, I just assumed that you were busy. You've got so much going on." Like,
yeah.
I would have made room on my calendar, but we've convinced them. So you are a great example. I have the sweetest example that I use. So when my husband's dog had to be put down, I was just like, oh, it's fine. She never spoke to me the whole time. I'm not going to miss her. It's not going to be a big deal. And you said, and so you and your daughter came to my house, and I had said I was worried about my granddaughter. So you guys came, and we all sat, and you and your daughter helped Skylar write a letter to Pa, because she had gotten it in her idea. Well, I had coached her that Oli dog was going to go and be with Pa. And so it wasn't that we were losing Oli, as she was going home to be with Pa. And so she decided, so you said, well, let's write him a letter. So you and your lovely daughter helped Skylar draw a picture and write a letter, and made it into a really big ritual and ceremony. And she just felt so nurtured. And then I'm like, so, oh, that was so nice of you. Thank you. And you said, and we'll be there when you take her to be put down. No, it's fine. It's not going to bother me. I'll be perfectly fine. And you just said, if we're going to wait for your nervous system to tell you what you need, we're going to all die of old age. So you guys showed up there when I took the dog in to be put down. And I think I felt more just because you were there, because of the oxytocin from you relentlessly pursuing me. Shut myself down and probably done some dysfunctional behaviors instead. But every time I look at those pictures, I think that's just one of the sweetest memories I have of someone saying, we're not waiting for you to need anything, we're showing up.
Yeah, and I was honored that you let me be part of that experience. And it's a good reminder that oftentimes the person who's grieving may not have the capacity to even explain what they need, and some people will often say, like, let me know what you need. Do you think anybody that's like grieving, even silently, even the dog of your ex-husband that you did not have a special bond, like, so yes, people in Barbara's audience, people when they're grieving, they don't really know what they need. And certainly most of us, the majority of us, have nervous systems that are shaped to just shut us down. That's a mega protective mechanism that I think we should start talking about it pretty openly, because there's a lot of us, in that boat. So it's important when somebody's grieving, just be there. Like I really sincerely didn't do anything. I just drove, and was just there. I didn't have any, it's the last thing probably. A person who's grieving, they don't need you to fix it. They just need your presence, to be there. So that's kind of like on the other side of it, And for ourselves when we're in grief, to say, you know what, to brave saying at least, I don't know what on earth I need right now, but I really value you being here.
Yeah, it was great. And even the problem is some of us are so wounded, we can't even say that. It's like if I open my mouth to say all those nice things, I will blow up and fly around the room backwards.
Yeah.
I'll be like Humpty Dumpty, I'll fall apart, and I'll never get myself together again. So I can just say thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's really normal as well, because if we think about it like neurobiologically, when our brain flips the switch, we don't have access to this part, the neocortex, that can actually, come up with the words and say all those things, And it's perfectly okay. I think it's important for all of us humans, because grief is a very normal human experience that will go through over and over. It's never ending. So it is important to keep that in mind, because sometimes we'll be in grief and we won't have the words. So I think expanding our understanding of grief as a process, as a normal part of being human, is super important, because sometimes we may not have the words, and now our brain is flipped and we're like frozen and we're saying, I'm fine. I'm fine. That's all I can say. Nothing else, And sometimes, yeah, bring that oxytocin and just give somebody a hug, I remember while you were telling me you were fine, I just gave you a hug. And I think that's maybe when you got a little teary-eyed, because it's like it will calm down the nervous system. It'll melt the armor that we've learned to build, to survive. And certainly when we're going through something difficult, I think for me, I'm cool when I'm shiny and everything's great, But when I'm struggling, that's when the armor comes up, and
Sure.
also it's also intertwined. There's so much stuff in our subconscious, and just in case your audience is not aware, like research shows what 95% of us, our thoughts, our emotions, and our actions are driven by our subconscious. Very small percent of what we do. It's like, oh, shall I take this road today to go to work? Or, shall I stop at Pete's or Starbucks? Only 5% of what's actually happening in our inner world is part of our conscious mind's shenanigans, as I like to call them. 95% is our subconscious. So,
Right.
Going back to what I said in the beginning, when you said, what do you want to tell us about grief? If you think about it from this way, grief sucks, okay? There is no two ways around it. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to give you a pep talk about it. When we're in grief, we're going to sit with pain. We're going to sit with pain for months, for years. It's going to feel better. And then we're going to be right back to where we began, And at the same time, it can be that little portal, that invitation, where, yeah, wow, I was never shown compassion, just a little pause and that little recognition that we were talking about earlier. Oh my gosh, like my heart is breaking every time I hear about the garage door, What do you need right now? How can I support you? I didn't do that. How did that came up?
I don't know.
Yeah, and then actually recognizing that I was never taught how to be compassionate for myself. What one little thing I can do? Okay, this is a very difficult process, Then bringing in the connection, all those things, they're not all gonna come up to us. There is no bullet pointed recipe on how to get over it. And all these points are super important to keep in mind when we're going through it.
So at the end of my videos, I always ask people for your 1-minute wisdom, and I think we just got it. But if everybody fast forwarded all the way through the video and only watched your very last 1 minute, what is the one thing you wish that people who are living this life that is full of loss and grief and restoration would carry out of our time together?
And you can pick another one, but I would say the one thing that I wish we were taught about grief is that it's a very normal part of the human experience. And it really calls upon us to tap into our own capacity for self-compassion and learning to be supportive of ourselves versus beating ourselves up because, wait, I thought there were these stages of grief and I've already been through that. I've checked that box. It's like, no, it's not linear. And it is an incredible portal to reconnecting with our true selves, becoming our own best friends, and actually realigning our mind, body, emotions, and spirit. And I know it wasn't one sentence, but that
That was
question
great. That was
prompted
perfect.
a lot of thoughts in my mind.
I know. So thank you so much for doing this with me. It was great talking to you. We
I
haven't
know,
really
it was
sat and
fun.
spent this much quality time together in a long time.
And we do need to spend more quality time together for sure. And we didn't, I don't know, we can reconnect. I don't know when you will be publishing this. We didn't really say anything about my book, or how people can find out more about it, but my book will probably not be published until March.